The galaxy had seen many wars, but none like this one. For more than 50 years, two great alien empires, the Korath Dominion and the Veyron Alliance, had fought without pause. Entire planets had burned, star systems had become graveyards of twisted metal, and no one could even remember why the war had started. To the people living under these empires, the conflict was no longer about victory or justice. It was simply survival. On the neutral worlds of the Galactic Council, ambassadors gathered every cycle to discuss peace. The council was made of dozens of species, some large and powerful, others small and fragile. They tried everything, negotiations, treaties, trade deals, but nothing worked. Every time a treaty was signed, it was broken within months. Every ceasefire ended with another surprise attack. The war seemed endless, and hope slowly faded across the stars. Among these tired voices, whispers began about a new possibility. A species that had stayed away from galactic politics might hold the answer. A species that lived on a small blue planet called Earth. They were called humans. At first, most dismissed the idea. Humans were newcomers. They had only reached the stars a few hundred years ago. Compared to ancient empires that had ruled for millennia, they seemed unimportant. Their worlds were few, their influence weak, and their culture still strange to many aliens. But there were stories. Quiet stories that painted a different picture. Merchants spoke of humans who negotiated with unmatched skill. Soldiers told tales of human marines who fought with terrifying speed and creativity. Scientists whispered about human inventions that solved problems no other species could handle. And historians, the few who dug into Earth's past, often shook their heads in disbelief. Humanity's history was filled with wars, short, brutal, and decisive. Unlike most species, humans never allowed conflicts to drag on for centuries. When forced to fight, they ended things quickly. The council debated endlessly. Could humanity be asked to step in? Would they even agree? Many feared that humans once involved might not stop. Others argued that the war had already claimed too many lives and it was time to risk something new. Finally, desperation won. Quietly, envoys from the council approached Earth. They expected long talks, hesitation, maybe even refusal. They thought humans would demand resources, influence, or power in return. Instead, when the council finished describing the war, the human leaders remained silent. For several long minutes, they only listened, eyes cold and thoughtful. Then one of them spoke two simple words: "We'll handle it." The envoys were stunned. Handle it? The Korath Dominion and the Veyron Alliance commanded fleets of millions. They had weapons that cracked moons and shields that swallowed suns. Even united, the council could not match their strength. How could Earth, a single young species, handle such a conflict? Rumors spread quickly across the council halls. Some laughed at humanity's arrogance. Others whispered in fear that perhaps humans knew something no one else did. The empires themselves ignored the news. To them, humans were still children of the stars. Their fleets were small, their colonies scattered. Let them try, the empires thought. It would make no difference, but the humans did not argue, boast, or make speeches. They simply began to prepare. Far across the Sol system, shipyards lit up as thousands of vessels were readied for war. Fleets of carriers, cruisers, and sleek destroyers gathered in silence. Drones were armed, strike teams trained, and supply lines stretched across wormhole networks. Everything was done with precision and quiet speed. Unlike the empires, who announced every move with fanfare and threats, humanity moved like a shadow. On alien worlds, spies tried to track the human buildup but failed. Their technology was unfamiliar, their tactics confusing. By the time the war empires realized something was happening, it was too late. The humans had already positioned themselves on the border where the fiercest battles were being fought. Meanwhile, among the ordinary citizens of the galaxy, rumors grew into stories. Some said humans had weapons that ignored shields. Others claimed their soldiers could survive wounds that would kill anyone else. Still others whispered that Earth had allies in secret, waiting to strike together. The truth was far simpler, but far more dangerous. Humanity was not bringing allies, miracles, or ancient secrets. They were bringing one thing: finality. For humans, war was never endless. It was a storm to be endured, a fire to be extinguished, and when it burned fast. The day came when the Council announced humanity's official entry into the war. Many dismissed it as symbolic. A few human fleets would appear, fight a battle or two, and then retreat. But on the border of the contested sector, alien scouts suddenly vanished. Entire patrol fleets stopped responding. Recon ships returned with trembling reports of massive human formations assembling in silence. Admirals of both empires laughed. They called the humans reckless, foolish, and weak. They promised to destroy them in a single strike. But deep inside their command ships, some generals felt a quiet unease. They remembered the first time they had met humans in small skirmishes. They remembered how unpredictable they were, how their tactics changed without warning, how their soldiers refused to surrender even when hopelessly outnumbered. These memories haunted them, though they tried not to show it. As the human fleets finally moved forward, the galaxy held its breath. Billions of beings tuned into broadcasts, watching to see if Earth would rise or be crushed. No one knew then that in just a few short hours, the war that had lasted generations would no longer exist. Dare between the Korath Dominion and the Veyran Alliance had been a graveyard for years. Countless battles had been fought there, and the stars themselves seemed scarred by war. Broken fleets drifted in silence, the wreckage of ships larger than cities spinning endlessly. For decades, the two empires had spilled their might into this region, and still neither side had gained victory. But then, one day the stars changed. At first, it was only a flicker on long-range sensors. Then another. Then hundreds. Within minutes, the screens of every monitoring station lit up with warnings. Something was coming through the jump lanes, something massive. It was the humans. They did not arrive with a few token ships as the empires had expected. They came with a fleet so large that even the most hardened admirals froze in shock. Carrier groups, each bristling with fighters, glided into formation. Sleek destroyers swept forward like hunting packs. Dreadnoughts, armed with weapons no alien sensors could fully identify, positioned themselves at the edges of the system. And at the center of it all was the human flagship, the Solar Spear. Its hull shone with a dull gray finish unmarked by banners or emblems. Humans did not need to decorate their ships to prove anything. Their silence was their strength. The Empire scrambled to respond. The Korath Dominion rushed to deploy its border fleet, while the Veyran Alliance ordered its commanders to prepare for a joint strike. Old enemies, who had spent half a century trying to destroy each other, suddenly found themselves united in fear of a new enemy. But the humans did not wait for challenges or formalities. They moved. Without warning, the Solar Spear launched its first strike. A wave of drones, each the size of a fighter, spread across the battlefield. They moved with frightening precision, weaving through wreckage and debris as if guided by unseen hands. Within moments, alien patrol fleets vanished from the screens. No desperate calls for help, no extended firefights, just silence. Then the human cruisers advanced. Their rail cannons fired with thunder that could be felt through the void itself. Each round moved so fast it burned like a star when it hit, slicing through alien shields as if they were paper. Entire formations of Korath warships were torn apart before they could even return fire. The Veyran fleet tried to counter with missile barrages, filling space with deadly swarms. But humanity had prepared. Point defense lasers carved the missiles into dust before they reached their targets. And where one or two did break through, shields flickered and held. Human engineering had accounted for everything. Admirals in alien command ships stared at their screens in disbelief. For half a century they had fought each other with fleets numbering in the millions, and never had either side gained such overwhelming dominance. Yet humanity, in the span of minutes, had reduced entire sectors of the battlefield to silence. But humans did not stop at space superiority. Dropships rained down on contested worlds, moving faster than planetary defenses could lock onto them. Human Marines disembarked in disciplined formations, their armor sealed and their weapons humming with quiet menace. Where alien troops expected a drawn-out fight, they were met with shocking speed. Human soldiers did not advance in straight lines. They did not fight in predictable patterns. They adapted instantly, changing tactics on the battlefield without hesitation. An enemy stronghold that had taken decades to defend fell in less than an hour. A fortress shield that had held against the Dominion for years flickered and collapsed under coordinated human assault teams. The psychological impact was even greater than the military one. Alien soldiers who had been raised to believe this war was eternal suddenly saw an enemy that fought like nothing they had ever known. Where their commanders shouted orders, human units moved wordlessly, each soldier knowing what the others would do. Where they relied on overwhelming numbers, humans relied on precision. And where they expected a war of attrition, humans fought a war of decision. By the third hour, the Korath Dominion had lost 2 entire fleets. By the fourth, the Veyran Alliance's supply lines were cut off. By the fifth, both empires were forced into retreat, abandoning positions they had held for generations. Across the galaxy, broadcasts carried the news in real time. Billions of citizens from neutral worlds watched in stunned silence as humanity dismantled the war machine of 2 great empires. In council chambers, ambassadors sat frozen, unable to believe what their eyes were showing them. On backwater colonies, children whispered to each other that humans were not soldiers, they were storms. Inside the alien war councils, panic spread. Admirals argued, commanders shouted, but none could deny the truth. They were losing faster than anyone thought possible. Their fleets, their armies, their defenses, all falling apart in hours. And then came the moment that shattered their pride completely. The combined command fleet of both empires, nearly 10,000 ships strong, gathered for one last desperate stand. They believed that if they poured everything into a single battle, they might overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers. The fleet moved as one, advancing on the human line with all the fury of decades of hatred. The humans met them calmly. The solar spear transmitted a single message to every ship in the system. We warned you. Now you will see. What followed was not a battle, it was an execution. Human fleets moved with precision that no alien computer could match. Enemy formations were cut apart before they could close the distance. Strike craft slipped through defenses, crippling command ships in seconds. Within 40 minutes, the mighty fleet of 10,000 was reduced to wreckage. Survivors fled into hyperspace, carrying with them the terrible truth. Humanity had not come to fight a war. Humanity had come to end it. When the guns finally fell silent, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Where once the stars had been filled with endless conflict, now there was only wreckage and the silent, waiting presence of the human fleet. In that silence, the galaxy realized something it had never believed possible. The war was already over. The battlefield was silent. For the first time in more than 50 years, no cannons fired, no fleets clashed, and no worlds burned. Where once the endless war between the Korath Dominion and the Veyran Alliance had filled the skies with destruction, now there was only the quiet drift of wreckage. At the center of it all stood the human fleet. The solar spear and its companions waited in perfect formation, their weapons still hot but their guns quiet. To the humans, the fight was already over. To the empires, it was the end of everything they had known. On the flagship bridges of both the Korath and the Veyran, admirals stared at their shattered command screens. Fleets that had taken centuries to build were gone in hours. Fortresses that had stood for decades lay in ruins. Generals who had believed in eternal war now sat pale and broken. Realizing that the humans had done the unthinkable, they had finished what no one else could. But the most shocking part was not the victory itself. It was what came after. Humans did not advance further. They did not occupy planets or raise banners of conquest. They simply sent a message, broadcast to every channel in the sector, translated into every known language. The war is over. If you wish to fight again, know that we will be the first you face. If you wish for peace, then keep it. The words were simple. No threats, no demands, no speeches about power or glory. Just a statement sharp and final. Across the galaxy, the message rippled like thunder. On neutral worlds, people gathered around holoscreens to watch the broadcast again and again. On council stations, ambassadors sat in stunned silence, realizing they had just witnessed history. For the first time in living memory, 2 great empires had been forced to stop fighting, and not by treaties, not by exhaustion, but by an outside hand strong enough to make them obey. The Korath Dominion was the first to answer. Their emperor, once a proud and ruthless figure, now spoke with a voice heavy with defeat. The Dominion will respect the human command. The war will end. The Veyran Alliance followed soon after, their leaders weary and beaten. They too agreed to cease all hostilities. There was no other choice. The Galactic Council immediately declared the war concluded, though the word declared felt hollow. It was not the Council that had brought peace. It was not their diplomacy or their votes or their endless debates. It was humanity. And that truth could not be ignored. Fear and wonder in the weeks that followed, the galaxy struggled to understand what had happened. How could a young species, one that many had dismissed as inexperienced, crush 2 of the greatest powers in only hours? Scholars searched for answers. They studied human history and were horrified by what they found. Humanity's past was filled with wars. Some fought on continents, some fought across oceans, some fought in the skies and beyond. But the pattern was always the same. Humans never allowed endless conflict. When forced into battle, they fought with everything they had until the fight was finished. To them, war was not a slow bleeding of resources. It was a storm short and violent that either destroyed or ended. The Korath and the Veyran had been trapped in a cycle for decades, but humans had shattered that cycle in hours. Among ordinary people of the galaxy, feelings were mixed. Some saw humans as saviors, the ones who had finally ended a hopeless nightmare. Others saw them as monsters, a force too powerful to be trusted. Whispers spread in markets and spaceports. If they could do this to the empires, what could they do to us? And yet even in fear there was respect. Because whatever else humans were, they were decisive. The councils debate in the council halls, ambassadors argued endlessly. Should humanity be praised? Should they be feared? Should limits be placed on them? But as the debates dragged on, humans did not attend. They sent no delegates, no negotiators. When questioned, the only answer they gave was, "We are not here for politics. We are here to stop wars." That silence spoke louder than any speech. It meant that humanity did not care for power in the way the other species did. They did not crave territory. They did not demand tribute. They simply wanted the galaxy to stop wasting time in pointless destruction. This unsettled many, because it meant that humanity's true motives were hard to understand. A species that fought for resources or land was predictable, but a species that fought simply to end fighting, that was something far more dangerous. On the ground for soldiers on the front lines, the shift was even more dramatic. Korath troops who had expected to fight until death were suddenly ordered to stand down. Veyran armies that had lived in trenches for decades walked out into open fields and stared at the sky in silence. They did not cheer, they did not celebrate. They only looked toward the horizon, where human ships still floated above like silent guardians. On liberated worlds, the reaction was different. Civilians who had grown up in constant fear of bombardment stepped outside their shelters for the first time in years. Children saw stars that were not filled with fire. Cities that had been rebuilt 100 times finally stood without smoke above them. For these people, humanity was not a threat. Humanity was hope. A new question months later, the galaxy was still adjusting. Trade routes reopened, planets rebuilt, and soldiers returned home. The war that had once seemed eternal was spoken of in the past tense, but everywhere one question remained. What happens the next time? Because the galaxy had learned something that day, something that could not be forgotten. If humans chose to fight, no war could last long. Their fleets would arrive, their soldiers would strike, and the conflict would end, whether anyone wanted it or not. And so whenever whispers of conflict began in far-off sectors, one question always followed: will the humans join? Because if they did, everyone already knew the answer. The war would be over before it truly began.